and welcome back to the podcast. I'm here, Vernaleken, and...
Hi there, I'm Lindsay Renzullo, and we have a special guest today from the MSPCA, Mike Keiley. So thank you so much for joining us. We love having special guests on our show. It always spices it up a bit.
Yeah. So you're the Director of Adoption Services, is that right?
Director of Adoption Centers and Programs.
Centers and Programs, thank you. So tell us a little bit about, I guess, let's start with who you are and how you got into what you're doing.
Yeah, so I've actually been at MSPCA at Nevins Farm in Methuen for 23 years under my career, and primarily as the director there. And 2 years ago, I took the position of Director of Adoption Centers and Programs, which means that I oversee our Methuen campus, so the equine center, as well as the small animal shelter and the spay-neuter clinic. Our Boston location has a shelter and a spay-neuter clinic as well, and then our Cape Cod location in Centerville, which is just been redone, so it opened in June, the new building. We have a brand new clinic and shelter there as well.
Awesome. That's very exciting.
So how did you get into that? How did that become your life's work?
I started when I was 16 and actually started with my mother telling me that, I thought I wanted to work with animals, and so everybody who wants to work with animals, you imagine being a veterinarian, as I think you guys can relate to.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yes.
And so she said, you really need to build up your resume for college, so I'm going to sign you up to volunteer at the MSPCA. She had me dog walk after school. I didn't even know what an animal shelter was, so I begrudgingly went along with it and started walking dogs after school and just got really into it and excited about the work and had no idea what animal welfare was all about until I was exposed that way. I went to college expecting that was just a volunteer thing and then I'd be done, but I really missed it and started going back on weekends and holidays and school vacations. And then after I graduated, I realized during my college years that I really wanted to stay in animal welfare, and that's really I felt a draw and felt like my passion was really behind that. So I started into the supervisor role after college and onto manager and then director. I've been doing this for a very long time and really have seen such amazing things happen in Massachusetts and in New England and beyond, and just excited to always keep helping animals and people as much as I can.
Yeah, the Nevins Farm location, we have obviously, based on where we are, we have a lot of clients that will go there and adopt through there. And I mean, it's not just dogs and cats at that location. I mean, you just have every kind of animal there. You can get everything, right?
Oh, absolutely. We have farm animals, horses and cows. It used to be, our old saying was, we have animals as small as a mouse to as large as a cow, and then someone surrendered Madagascar hissing cockroaches to us. So now it's as small as a cockroach and as big as a cow. So we see pretty much everything you could imagine at some point.
Yeah, and I adopted my guinea pigs through the MSPCA.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And you also have great programs with training and stuff too, and we have a lot of clients that will go back there to do trainings, with their dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that a lot of people associate the MSPCA with adoption,
right?
Which makes sense. That's been our identity for many decades. But we really feel like we're a community resource, much greater than just adoptions. We have community outreach programs that are helping people with their animals in their homes. Sometimes that's food services if people can't afford food.
Wow, that's great.
Vaccination clinics. We run in the park vaccination clinic every year in Lawrence, as well as vaccine clinics at our shelter. And we offer spay-neuter for as low as free in some of our programs, to low cost so people have the opportunity for spay-neuter. We run education programs for kids as young as second grade or even younger than that, all the way up until they can start volunteering at 16.
Awesome.
Dog
My
training
kids
programs.
did their summer camp there. I mean, I guess I'm fully invested in the MSPCA.
You should have just done this part.
I was so excited to mention.
It's really good though. I mean, I've had clients that have volunteered there too as well, and I mean, it's a great program that you guys have set up over there.
Yeah, we really feel like we are very embedded in the community and that we're really responsive to the needs of the community and trying to figure out solutions for people that may have to work on a relationship with their animal in different ways. And sometimes that's medical, and sometimes it's behavior, sometimes it's information sharing. So all of it's really interesting stuff, and we're just trying to help build that human-animal bond as strong as we possibly can.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so, I mean, one thing that frequently we get asked as vets, or, how do animals end up at the MSPCA, or what are the different kind of paths that those adoptable animals reach you?
Yes, there's a lot of different ways, and it's really taken a considerable change, I'd say, over the last 5 years. When I first started, everything was about volume control, so there's just a major overpopulation issue in Massachusetts, New England, the entire country, and most of what we were seeing is just an overpopulation related issues. And
So just like animals picked up on the street? Like
everything from stray animals, or I had this unwanted litter, or I had too many animals, and it ran the gamut from, the common issues like I have allergies to this animal, or this animal doesn't fit my lifestyle. But it was really such an incredible volume. We were taking in somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 animals a year compared to what we are now, which is around just under 4,000.
Oh, wow.
And the spay-neuter programs that we ran really helped drive those numbers down. And what we're seeing is the vast majority of the animals that are now becoming homeless are usually related to lifestyle-related issues or behavior challenges or medical issues. So most of the animals coming to us are related to some sort of challenge that they're having. And so we're trying to build programs to help figure out ways that we might be able to support people. So if they're coming through and saying, I can't afford my animal, we're trying to figure out why is it they can't afford it, how can we solve that problem so they can continue their relationship with their animal instead of having to separate, especially when the expenses really start to get higher is when the animal's older. So we don't really want to see a 15-year-old cat be displaced if they don't have to. If we can figure out a way to support them and stay in their home, it's better for the animal, it's better for the person. And sometimes those are behavior related issues. We certainly have seen an uptick in behavior with dogs in our community. Sometimes that's aggression, sometimes it's nuisance behavior, or just behavior that makes it hard to stay in their lifestyle. So we're finding that people are often separating because they can't care for the animal, and the animal doesn't fit into their life the way that they had hoped. And sometimes we can build help with one of our programs to help recover that relationship, and sometimes rehoming is the right thing to do.
And those are just sort of like the local animals that you'll take in, but you still have relationships with places around the country, especially down south. I feel as though that's where the population for a lot of these dogs seem to be exploding, and they're sort of shipping a lot of those animals up to shelters up here, right?
Yeah, there's been a lot of translocation for animals that are in higher volume shelters, and bringing them from an area where there's a lower population and a higher demand. It certainly makes sense. We don't actively participate in translocation unless it's related to something more significant like a natural disaster. So when the hurricane season happened last year, we took animals out of those disaster sites.
Oh, I see.
Or at times there's large cases of neglect or cruelty that happen in one part of our country, and we'll help to take some of those animals in if the case is one. We choose not to, partly because it's the infrastructure to be able to take animals in requires a 48-hour quarantine in a quarantine facility, and we didn't build our buildings with that in mind, so it would take a considerable amount of resources to change to that platform. But also we really felt like there's a lot of organizations that are taking those animals in, and that is great, but there's not as many organizations focusing on what issues are still problematic in our communities. And we really felt like if we had $100 to spend on bringing animals up, or $100 to invest in our community, we wanted to invest it into our community. And so we do that.
So how does that, I mean, I've noticed that explosion though of the pets moving, translocating from elsewhere, and that seems like, I don't know, how does that affect you at the MSPCA? Does it lower your adoption numbers because more people are choosing that route versus coming locally?
Not necessarily. I think adoption is cool finally. When I first started in this in 1994, adopting from an animal shelter was sort of taboo. Like, those are all problematic animals, and that's a dark, gloomy place to go. And so people often didn't enter shelters. And so part of what we were really doing back in the 90s and early 2000s was just trying to get people to think about adoption first. But I think people are more aware of that, especially with social media really coming into its own, and people being more aware of the plight of animals. So we're still seeing people coming in looking for animals and adopting, and that's at a really high level at this point. I think where we see the issues are usually when the transportation is arranged in a way that doesn't go well, and the person thought they were getting something and it turned out not to be what they expected. And if that relationship fails and that match doesn't work, some of the organizations are not in a position to be able to take those animals back.
Oh, so you end up with them.
Yeah, so we call it secondhand transport. That they become desperate and they need something, and they come to us to bring the animal to us. And that can be challenging. That animal has gone through so much from transporting from another area, sometimes from other parts of the world, and comes into Massachusetts. It doesn't work. And in the first week, the animal's getting back into a shelter system in Massachusetts, and then we're working with them from there. And we see a lot of animals that are affected by that in a negative way. And I think that translocation can be done really well if it's planned really well, and sometimes it can be really challenging because it's it's done more desperately and not as well planned out.
For the animals that are in your shelter, would you say like there's like an average like length of stay that they typically have? I mean, I would guess that it sort of varies on the particular animal, or what's wrong with the animal, or why the animal ended up in the shelter in the first place. But is it sort of a typical, what's a typical dog or typical cat or any animal?
Yeah, it really ranges. Length of stay was one of those things that we really focused in on trying to reduce when we were talking about an overpopulation issue, because we had highly adoptable animals that just were not getting into homes fast enough. And so shelter-related diseases would go up when we had that population at a higher level, and upper respiratory infections and other communicable diseases would be prevalent. Now our actual length of stay is longer because we're working with some animals that need a lot more resources to be able to be adopted. Sometimes that's behavior related issues, or it's sometimes geriatric animals or animals with medical issues. So we know that they're not necessarily as easy to find a match for. And so they'll stay a bit longer, but for the most part, they're getting adopted relatively routinely, and we're only finding a small portion that are sticking around for a really extended period of time. But for the average cat and dog coming into us, I'd say dogs probably average 2 to 3 weeks, and then they're in a new home. Cats probably a little bit longer if they have some challenges, but like if a kitten or a puppy comes in, they're in and out in a couple days.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no. Do you have something?
Well, I was just going to say, especially for those animals, are there certain animals that just you've found over the years, or have either certain conditions or problems that just are not adoptable? And like, what do we do with those pets? I mean, unfortunately, that things like that come up, right?
Right. So we do make decisions for euthanasia for animals that come to us, and the reason for that is we are an open admission platform shelter, so that means we never refuse any animals from coming in because of a medical condition, age, behavior, breed. Some shelters are not going to be able to take those animals in, and they'll say no because they don't have the capacity to rehome them, and so they'll end up with us. And we're really the largest open admission shelter system in Massachusetts. There's not even too many of those in general, so it does mean that animals that are too hard to adopt will come to us. We work really hard for every animal, and we try to figure out a program that'll help even the toughest to place animals. But there are times where the animal is too unsafe to rehome, and it wouldn't be fair for the animal or safe for the person to take on. Or sometimes we get compounding issues, like the animal's like a 15-year-old cat with a significant medical issue and also has a litter box issue. At that point, it starts to become too many compounding issues to be able to successfully rehome. And sometimes even with our greatest efforts, the animal just medically can't move forward. Yeah. So those are always really tough decisions, but what we worked really hard is to bring the number of euthanasias down to just those cases where
and it's sort of nice in the sense that you said like the open admission, like, because you do have some shelters that will probably lift some limitations, and then it will leave owners, sort of limited with where they can take their animals. So it's nice to have that option. It's somebody that's going to be able to take them on and try to do as much as they can to help get that animal to the appropriate home.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. Certain breeds, I think, it's no surprise to anybody that pit bulls are probably the hardest animals to move, and they're also, they're often rejected by other systems because people are already seeing them and they don't want to have too many of them, or they just don't want to try to rehome them. And so even with animal welfare, pit bulls can be a challenge. We take, we don't refuse on any breed. So we see, I think 1 in every 8 dogs coming into our Methuen location, 1 in every 4 into our Boston location are pit bull or pit bull mixes. So we do see that frequency that happens often. Yeah. And sometimes people just still have that stigma about pit bulls that makes it a little bit harder for them to get adopted as well.
Yeah, so it's an interesting conversation that I was having with someone about, all of these definitions, very emotional things that people will say. They'll say it's a high kill shelter. There's this one Animal Planet show that always says that these pets came from a high kill shelter or no kill shelters. And my understanding is that can be a questionable maybe terminology, because a no kill shelter, are they sending those cases somewhere else, the ones that would not be adoptable? Are they just not taking them, or how does that work?
I mean, I personally really hate those labels.
Right.
It's, because it really divides animal welfare and makes it really for the public. The public does not understand when we're using those terms what we really mean. No kill doesn't mean that those shelters don't euthanize. It just means that they adopt out 90% of their animals or more. The MSPCA does that, so we could call ourselves no kill, but it's so misleading, and it creates this persona that some shelters choose not to euthanize, and these
Right.
high kill shelters choose to euthanize, but that's not the issue. The issue is that the shelters that are making decisions for euthanasia out of volume are having a bigger issue in their community, and the shelter is a reflection of what's happening in their community. So if the community is way overpopulated and animals are being turned out in the street and becoming homeless constantly, it's not the shelter's fault that issue is out of control, and it's not that responsibility, and it gives the impression that it's just one shelter is doing the right thing and one shelter is doing the wrong
Right,
thing.
right. I
We're
agree.
just dealing with different
Yeah.
circumstances, and I could tell you every shelter that's labeled as a high kill shelter is working their butts off to really help as many animals as possible and solve the problem in their community, and it should never be a reflection on them that they're not doing just as much work, if not more, than the shelter that might be labeled as a no-kill shelter.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I just have this picture of like Lady and the Tramp. Like, there's these really bad associations sometimes
It's
with
true.
shelters, and then you go to a place like the MSPCA where it's just, it's like bright and airy, and it seems like it's just, you've worked very hard, I think, to create that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think we want people to be comfortable, and we want them to come and feel welcome, and so we want everyone to be energized by wanting to help animals and be engaged in animal welfare, because it's not the shelter's responsibility to deal with animal welfare. It's the
Right.
whole community's issue, and how we treat our animals and how we support them and how we make sure that they're cared for is every single person's responsibility. And we want to be that area that helps bind those together and helps to stimulate that and give people the tools necessary to make sure animals are protected. And we want it to just be a place that people are happy and excited to come to as much as we can.
Now, does the MSPCA have any like fostering? Do you do fostering type of volunteer positions, and what would that entail for the public if they're interested in doing something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We there's always going to be a percentage of animals that need some time outside of the shelter before they can get adopted. We don't see as many kittens and puppies as we used to, but we certainly do still see, especially kittens that need some time in foster to grow and be healthy and be ready for adoption.
Like
at
the
a few weeks
bottle
of age.
babies.
Bottle babies or mom. Actually, it's hard to find mom and foster homes for moms and kittens, or sometimes orphan kittens that are 5 or 6 weeks old that just need a safe place to grow and be away from any disease until their immune system's established. Often guinea pigs, we'll see, and there's animals that come in with medical issues.
I know. I'm debating getting a guinea pig. My husband just got us a hamster on Saturday. I don't know if I told you.
Oh no.
Yeah, we did. She's very cute, but yes, yeah.
Guinea pigs are great. I think they're one of the best pets for kids, especially, and that they have no defense mechanism, so you really take no risk with them, and they're generally really easy to handle for everybody. But there's also a percentage of animals that come in with ailments that need foster homes. It's actually the hardest one for us to find for foster homes are adult cats that might have an upper respiratory infection or another ailment, and finding a foster home for those. So that's what we're really seeking, is a lot of those folks that can do adult cat foster.
Yeah. And it's like, sort of minimal responsibility in the sense that you're fostering this animal only for a short period of time. People can feel like there's not a, serious long-term commitment. Ooh, sorry. But it's a great way to help out the community.
Failed foster.
Yes,
Well, yeah, that would
sometimes.
definitely
I know
happen.
we're right around Valentine's Day, right? So anybody with commitment issues, this is the way to go. Like, don't worry about Valentine's. Come and foster some adult cats for us, and
I love that.
that'll work for you.
So failed foster is when you foster it and then you keep it.
Yes. Yeah.
See, I think those are successes, not
Those
failures.
are-
Right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
to be a successful
definitely.
foster.
We say it, Joe.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm always interested. Where do you get funding to do what you do?
Everything is private donations, so we in grants. So we certainly do not get any state or federal funding, which is very confusing.
It is kind of confusing. I always figured there'd be some sort of component of state funding, right?
There's two things that are confusing about our name. One is Massachusetts,
Right.
so it makes it seem like we have a government affiliation, which we don't. And then the SPCA part, everyone thinks that the ASPCA is our parent organization, but it's really, they just found it first, so they were really smart and called it ASPCA, and we were Massachusetts SPCA. So everything is private donations, and we rely on the generosity of supporters to help make sure every one of our programs runs.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So, what was some of the other things? So, can you give some, potential owners advice for what? Let's say they don't live here, because our advice would always be go to the MSPCA. But if they live in Australia, what should they be looking for in looking for a good rescue that they should be working with?
Well, I think in general, there's very few exceptions in that every animal welfare agency, however they define themselves, is generally doing something good for animals. So for the most part, you can be pretty secure that if you're working with a rescue or a shelter, that they're probably fine to work with. I think where the questions really come up is how transparent they are, and how much you want to really dig into. If it's adoption, you really want to think about what do they know about the animal, what's the history, how much are they giving you for information. And I think everyone should expect that when information's available, it should be disclosed. So the past history, if it has a profile from the owner, you want to be able to read that and have that described to you. The medical history of the animal, if it's known, you really want them to be transparent about that. I think where rescues get into a little bit of hot water is when they withhold some of that information. So if it's an animal that has challenges with aggression and there was a bite history and they don't give you that information up front, they're really putting people in jeopardy. And there are organizations that do operate on trying to more desperately keep those animals from being euthanized, and so they may paint the picture of what happened in a way that the person's not necessarily understanding what they're taking on. So I think transparency is just the huge and most important part.
I have definitely seen that, and it's not like I think that they're being nefarious or really trying. They're not trying to do. They're trying to home this animal, right? But I do think sometimes I felt like owners were a little pressured almost into. Like, no, this will work out, this will be great, and they might be hesitant about, one thing or another in the medical industry. Even if they're being completely transparent, the owner is like pulling back a little, but they're kind of trying to.
Well, sometimes owners will do that with us for an exam. Like, let's say if the pet went to some other vet at a different practice and we don't have maybe all the medical records, and the pet tried to bite the other vet or did bite the other vet, and then we're going to examine the pet for the first time. They won't tell us that when we're examining the pet, because they honestly don't want us to think badly of their pet, but then when their pet tries to bite us, they say, "Oh, geez, you did it to the other vet, too." And it's like, oh, just let us know, and we can work with them a little bit better.
You want to paint everything with rose-colored
glasses,
so.
It's really tough, and I think when we talk about translocation, I think that's where we see a lot of that happening. And it comes from what the motivation for the translocation is. If you're really trying to help find adoptable animals for people looking for animals up here, and you're really focused on the match, those are often prepared well enough that they're putting the person forward on that, or equal, I should say, with the animal. And sometimes if the motivation is to avoid euthanasia, people may act more desperately. You see that, like we'll see rescues that you adopt the animal online, you never meet the animal ahead of time.
And then you go meet them in a parking lot in New Hampshire.
Right, and you get handed off out of a van in a parking lot. That should raise some red flags for people. Generally speaking, that's not focused on making sure it's a good match for you. And I think at the end of the day, I don't know what the percentage is, but those are not always ending in successful matches, and then the animal gets into a shelter system anyway, or goes through the stressful process of being handed off over and over again. And we see that a lot. A lot of the animals that we see coming into our adoption centers, they've changed hands 5 times in less than a year, and that is a huge amount of stress on that animal. And I think we have to make sure that we're thinking about the people component as much as the animal component when we're trying to have successful adoption programs.
Just to be clear, I was not bashing New Hampshire. It's just that the New Hampshire laws are different than Massachusetts laws. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but Massachusetts does have a quarantine requirement and New Hampshire doesn't. So in Massachusetts, you can't do that. A rescue organization could not ship a pet and go to a parking lot and hand the pet over to you, but actually in New Hampshire they can. So some of these organizations operate there and will have you just drive to some random place and pick up your animal. And I've seen quite a few excellent adoptions that went that way, but I don't think I would do that.
Oh, we have a question. We have a question from an online user. Oh, you did it. Oh,
that's how you did it.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
There was an admission, not a question. So. No, and it can work great. I mean, sometimes those do, but I will certainly tell you we see the times when it doesn't work, and they really are tragic situations for everybody. And, a lot of times kids are involved and kids get injured. And I really think, it's always important to make sure that we are protecting animals. And I just think as long as we really think through the process and we're putting people in a good position, that's really what we need to not lose sight of when working for animals is that, and I think that, that the thing that we often hear is, I'd rather work with animals than people, but our job is really we work with people on behalf of animals, and same with veterinary communities. So it's I think if you're really feeling like something doesn't feel right about the process and you don't feel like you're comfortable with the way that they're describing it, you should probably back off. And it's totally okay to do that. There's other ways to acquire animals through adoption, and there's other organizations that are doing it in a way that's more supportive. So, and
there are a lot of pets out there for adoption. You might be looking on Pet Finder like this is the one, and it might be, but it also, there may be others out there for you that if that particular pet doesn't really work out, it'll still be okay.
I do think it's nice to be able to go to a place like the MSPCA that has sort of, like you had stated, embedded itself in the community and be able to meet the pet, talk to the people, see what the pet's like at that facility, try to get a feel if it's going to be a good fit for you. That's all really invaluable stuff.
And I think when people do get into mistakes is really with dogs, to be honest with you. Cats, I think people are a little bit more open to because there's not as much variation. They're all roughly the same size. And so you're really looking at minor details like color or hair length or things like that. And so people sometimes go into our cat room with a little bit more open-mindedness and focused on the personality more than they are on the looks. But with dogs, it's because there's such variance in size and hair code and breeds that people get really laser focused. And so they I really want a German Shepherd. And they get focused on that so they don't see any of the other animals around them. And my advice for people, if they're really looking to acquire a dog, is have some breeds that you have preferences for, but don't ignore the rest of the animals that are there, because you may miss your next best friend because you've really only looked at narrowly at what you're looking for an adoption.
Yeah, it's a good piece of advice.
That's what happened with my dog.
Is it really?
She showed up here. She never managed to make it to a shelter environment, but she was here, had been dropped off by some owner that didn't want her anymore, and I ignored that dog for 3 days walking by her cage, and she was actively trying to get my attention, and because I didn't want a little dog. I didn't want a little fluffy terrier dog, and then
that's what you ended up with.
And I noticed.
And now you're converted. Right?
Yeah,
exactly.
The little dogs are the best. They're so cute. Yeah.
So when you have you are in the position, unlike us often, of being able to actually counsel owners on what they maybe should be getting. Do you do much of that? If you have an owner that comes in and you're feeling like they're looking for a dog, but maybe they don't have the time or energy for the dog, do you try to actively steer them towards a different type of animal, or do you?
Yeah, and sometimes they're open to that, and sometimes they're not. So I think trying to reset people's expectations is a lot of what we do, and really trying to have them focusing on the personality and what it would mean for their lifestyle. I mean, dogs are, it's it's sort of the funny thing that we always see at the shelter is the worst behaved dogs get the most attention because they're jumping on the bars and they're and the person's like, oh, it's choosing me, and it's no, it's really kind of a wild dog, and so they get focused in on that, but that doesn't fit their they don't want to go out and walk the dog or exercise the dog. And so trying to explain to people to focus on what their lifestyle is and what they want. I hate walking my dog, especially in the winter, and it's miserable. So I want a dog that doesn't want to go out all the time. They don't want to go and get the 1-year-old husky puppy that's jumping at the top of the cage. Right. They're never going to be able to keep up with it. So starting people's expectations to think about lifestyle and personality is one of the main things that we do. Switching species is really challenging. Yeah. It's hard to get dog people to want to adopt a cat. Really, where we see any of that change is really rabbits and guinea pigs. Just going back to the guinea pig theme, people often come in wanting a rabbit for their kids, but rabbits are really challenging for kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they never really work out. They're labor intensive and they live a lot longer, and so kids lose interest over a period of time. They kick with their back legs, and so kids have a hard time holding them, and even young kids just physically holding them if they're too big. So we often get people to switch from rabbits to guinea pigs because they're very similar in a lot of ways, but they're a lot more successful for kids to care for, and quite honestly, don't live quite as long. So it's usually a commitment that works better if you're kid focused on your animal.
Don't tell me that.
I know.
Guinea pigs are still.
I know. Actually, I can just imagine the guinea pig volunteers at our shelter saying, "What's he talking about?" They can live to 10 years old.
Mine are 5 years old. They're doing great. Yeah, so that's a tough thing because I've definitely had owners that in retrospect, as you talk with them, you're like, gosh, this was not a great match, and I could see that it would be difficult to sort of steer them away ultimately, but as long as you're providing them the support in the end, if this doesn't work out, because you do, if this doesn't work out, we want you to reach out to us.
And we do a lot of work, if we think that the person's got the right spirit to move forward with an animal, even if they're challenging and they need support to figure it out. We put a lot of resources into helping that adoption be successful, both prior to the adoption to get them prepared, and then post-adoption if they're having struggles. And that's where our behavior programs really come into play. So we're able to get them right into training and and sometimes one-on-one behavior counseling if they have struggles. But often with a dog that's really jumpy or mouthy, they're getting a couple of sessions with us and our behavior folks in advance to make sure that they have the tools necessary rather than just giving to them that day and hope that they figure it out. We really want to be as supportive as we can when it comes to adoption.
And I think that's what's like the big difference, right? Because you talk about your perception or shelter perception from where you were in the 90s to where you are now. I mean, I do feel like that's just huge. Being able to give owners resources, really wanting to have things be successful. And not that the shelters in the 90s weren't like that, but I just feel as though we have so many more tools now and we're utilizing them all, that we're really trying to make these things as successful as we can, as it can be. Because before, I don't feel like they would put that much into it.
No, I mean, we were really under the burden of the number of animals, and so it was really how quickly we can get them out to avoid euthanasia. And kind of like we're talking about with the translocation, our motivations were different. We have too many animals and not enough cages, so we didn't put as many resources into them. But and we had a small old shelter for any of you who've ever been to our old facility. That was built 15 years ago, and it was a different challenge. And I think we always just really wanted the opportunity. I remember being in that old building, just being flooded with animals and just feeling like I really just wish I had the tools to be able to do more for people and for the animals. And when we were given the opportunity to move in a new building, we really felt like, okay, we're going to take advantage of this. We're going to really build these programs out. And that's when we switched from, recognizing even the simplest things. We knew we could never adopt our way out of an overpopulation issue. That was just never going to work. So one of the first things we built out was a low-cost spay-neuter program. We knew where the overpopulations were, and in this area they were in Lawrence, Lowell, Haverhill, Methuen, and we could see that in our data, how many animals were coming in from those towns. But I think the impression that we had back then was, well, these towns just don't care about their animals. They don't care for animals the same way we do. They're neglectful. They're bad people. And what we started to realize as we built out those vaccine clinics and spay-neuter clinics is that, no, actually, this is just a matter of people do not have access to affordable resources. And they love their animals just the same as everybody else, but they can't afford a spay-neuter surgery. They can't do these things. They can't afford to vaccinate their animals annually. And so building those programs, in Lawrence, Haverhill, Methuen, and Lowell, did I say those towns right?
I
thought I said one town the same twice, but we offer spay-neuter packages for dogs for $75, free for pit bulls because we certainly want to drive down the pit bull numbers, $10 for cats, and we even help sometimes with rabbits for low cost as well. And our goal in those programs was to bring the volume down, and it worked beautifully. We went from a place where the overpopulation was so significant to the intake numbers dropping in our shelters, but also seeing less stray dogs in those communities. And we could see the data turning, like for Haverhill, they kept good data. They had twice as many strays coming in before we had those programs as they did after we had those programs, and the reclaim rates went up. And what that told us is that those communities were getting so desperate with the animals that they were just turning them loose, and so there wasn't ever a chance that they were going to get reclaimed because people were just abandoning the streets when it was. And now we're seeing that's not the case, and a much more stable community. So we have less animals coming in for adoption, which is a new opportunity for us to pivot and continue to help with community outreach and help dig deeper into what are the issues that people are dealing with in their community with their animals, and how can we help make sure that they have affordable access to be able to give their animal what they need. So it's been really kind of an interesting change, especially in the last 5 years.
It's okay if we have a little time for a little more? I just have, one thing that I think plays into our lives as well is we have this kind of rising cost of veterinary care, and so we deal with that on our end to try to manage that. What is your thought from a rescue perspective on that? Do you feel like it's something that's getting too high for a lot of owners to bear? Is it something that you just see in still the same small subset of a population, or what's your take?
I think as we move past spay-neuter and into other areas and really looking at what people are having trouble affording, I can certainly tell you from my perspective that say someone's dog gets hit by a car and has a broken leg, that is a really tragic situation for someone who's dealing with financial issues, because what are they really faced with for choices? They're being given the option of treating their animal and finding the money for that, euthanizing their animal because it has a broken leg, which is so sad, or surrender it to an animal shelter and never get it back. And it's like, those are so tragic situations. And we've seen people who say, no, I'm not doing any of those because I can't afford it. I'm not going to euthanize my animal, and I'm not going to give my animal away. And so you see an animal who's like reset and it's healed to some degree, but it's not great.
Yeah.
And but those people cared so much they wanted to keep their animal, and when only presented bad choices, they didn't make any choice. Excuse me. And I think the other one that gets challenging is like dental disease. It's prevalent for so many animals. Animals are living longer, and it's so hard to afford that. And it becomes a situation of, is the animal comfortable when they have a dental issue? And are we dealing with pain and suffering from that perspective? And are people faced with the same tough choices? And I think trying to figure out solutions for those situations are really important. Excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, those are always the kind of things that we run into as well. And, you know, are there options? Like, often we have those people in that situation. They've been hit by a car, they have a fracture or something. And so, yeah, we don't want to euthanize them either. So sometimes we'll say, well, why don't you call up the MSPCA? What do you tell those people when they call you?
We kind of look at all their options. So some things we can solve at the MSPCA, like if it's spay related and it's a pyometra, we usually try to figure those things out.
And not necessarily making the owner surrender it, but having them pay some component or something.
Yeah, exactly. We have Angel at Neshoba, which is in Westford, which is designed to be hospital related, but focused on people who are dealing with poverty related issues and getting them affordable resources. And I think you're seeing more and more places start to focus on that. Like Tufts Tech has that same type of program. We're looking to expand that through our hospital system to try to figure out ways that we can continue to provide those things for people. And then from an animal welfare standpoint, we're looking at it from a perspective of community outreach. So in Lowell, for example, we are building out a program, and it was based on a conversation that started years ago around dog safety in Lowell, and it was around pit bull issues. And we've been talking to Lowell about how do we help people with animal safety. And what we started to realize is that these are very tied into poverty. And the areas that we were seeing the aggression issues happen or the problems happen were in neighborhoods that were dealing with financial issues primarily. And there was low access to affordable resources for behavior or spay neuter or medical issues or even information. So we focused, it's called the Lowell Partnership for Pets. We just launched it this year. And we are working in the Acre and Back Central, which is, when you look at the poverty levels at Lowell overall, it's the overall Massachusetts, it's like 10% is the average. And when you look in those communities, those two particular neighborhoods, it's 40% poverty levels. So we know that financial components are a barrier for people to have success with their animals. So we're working with human services, so food pantries, the community action groups that are in those neighborhoods, and we're working with Angel at Neshoba, Lowell Humane Society, and the MSPCA at Nevins Farm to be able to provide all of those resources. And so it's food support through the Merrimack Valley Food Pantry. We're providing them with pet food so that they can distribute that out to people who are in financial need. We're offering spay neuter. We're offering $10 sick visits at Angel at Neshoba. And then when we start to identify, the Acre is the neighborhood where the boy was killed by two dogs in Lowell, and so we really focused on that area. So the community policing department, animal control, MSPCA, if we identify anybody that's dealing with behavior issues, we're offering them free behavior support through our behaviorists at Nevins Farm to try to be able to build a little bit safer community for the citizens of Lowell. So, it's on a relatively small scale, but I think when we can identify the areas that really are having problems with poverty, if we start there and try to think about how we can provide medical access or behavior access to people to help them keep their animals, but also, help those animals get what they need as well. I think that's really one of our focuses, and we'd love to build that out to a greater model so we can help more people, but I think that's really at the forefront of a lot of people's issues, is being able to afford those things.
It's like a very systematic and effective approach to things. I think that's great. Yeah. That's wonderful.
So, is there anything else before we end that you want to highlight that you didn't get a chance to?
Well, I would just say if anyone hasn't been to the MSPCA at any of our locations, it's worth a visit, especially Nevins Farm. It's I don't think I even really talked about all the farm animals that we have, but a 55-acre
amazing.
property.
Yeah.
You know, it's really a pretty special place. So if you live in this community and you haven't been there, I think it's really great. Or if you're listening in Australia, it sounds like we have a lot of people from Australia.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's animal shelters there to visit. But I think the first step is just like, for me, I never knew what an animal shelter was until my mom signed me up to volunteer. The first step in learning more about what animal welfare is all about is just visiting and seeing it for yourself. So I encourage everybody to do that.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's awesome.
And you've got a little shop there too. Like you can
Yeah.
go and there's a lot of supplies there that are really awesome. Like you curate that. Like they're good, gentle leaders are the harnesses that are good for
Dogs that
behavior
pull.
management
Yeah.
of dogs. And so it's a really nice little shop that you have that benefits, I think, the MSPCA.
Yeah, and
ultimately.
anything you buy there goes to help the animals. And
Big bales of hay if you need
exactly.
hay for your
That's one of our
guineas.
best sellers, and
Yeah.
I coined the term MSPCA,
Yes.
which I thought was really clever. And we also have a used tack shop for horses. So actually, that's one
Nice.
of the biggest income parts we have for our animals, and it's all people donated tack to us, and then we resell the good stuff, and on all the proceeds going to benefit the animals, which is great too.
That's great. Do we have any questions from our viewers?
No, we have
No.
a lot of love.
A lot of love.
Yeah.
Oh, a lot of love from the
nice.
MSPCA. We like that. We
Yeah,
like that a
we
lot.
love.
So before we go, we did want to just hit upon a really quick comment about that there was a recent Hills recall.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So some of you may have heard that a bunch of Hills prescription foods were recently recalled. If you feed your pet a canned Hills prescription food, it's not all of them, but there's a list on the Hills website of ones that you can look at. They'll give you lot numbers of the products that are recalled. So you should check that out if your pet is on one of them. It's a vitamin D related toxicity issue. The basics of that just are that one of their suppliers, they do test everything that goes into their foods ahead of time, and they had no problems on their testing, but that apparently one of the vitamin mixes was clumpy. And so basically some of the, it's just not evenly distributed. So a can might have too much vitamin D. In the end, if your pet is not showing any signs of any problems, you don't need to worry. If your pet is showing signs of any issues like excessive drinking, excessive peeing, maybe decrease in appetite, vomiting, those would be things that may not be related at all to the food, but if your pet's been fed one of the recalled diets, then Hills will take care of any diagnostic testing that needs to be done to see if it was related.
And it's only the canned food. It's not any of the dry
Only
prescription
the
diets.
canned, and it's not all of them. It's certain foods, and we don't have the list here because it is a lengthy list. But you should go and look if your pet's on any of those.
We can
foods.
find the link and put it up on our Facebook page for everybody. Yeah.
And we did notify any of our clients who did purchase any of those foods, as well as I think
I think we already put the link out, or we had it.
Well,
yeah.
either way.
That. We'll put one out for you guys on Facebook today.
So that's all for us today from the podcast. I'm Krista.
I'm Lindsay. Thank you guys so much for coming, and thank you so
Thank
much
you
to
so
our,
much,
our
Mike.
special
for having me.
guest. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Google Play, iTunes.
And anywhere else that you get podcasts.
Yes. And thank you so much for our sponsor, Ethos Veterinary Health.